viewers at home and those tuning in on Facebook Live, thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of Lunch Guide. I'm your regular host, Chef Andy, and today we are going to be doing something really interesting, something most of you will enjoy, and something some of you may actually incorporate into your dinners or your lunches this particular season of holidays in August. So for this particular reason, I'm going to be showing you how to make some potato bhajia, and we're going to proceed to begin by introducing the ingredients before us. So from the very front, I've got about half a lemon. I've also got some tamarind sauce. I've got some cumin powder and one large green chili. I've also got some garlic, some minced ginger, and some paprika powder. We're also going to need some gram flour, some fresh coriander, about 3 potatoes sliced about 1/4 inch. You're also going to require some regular all-purpose flour, some water for mixing your dough, and some salt and pepper to season, and last but not least, some turmeric, which will give you that nice beautiful color. But before we get that far, I'll give you this time to freshen up, grab your pens and papers, and when we come back, we're going to get cooking. See you after a short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to start this very simple process of making bhajias. And first off, very importantly, begin by heating up some oil. Remember, you are going to be deep frying this, so you are going to require some hot oil to do so. So first off, proceed to place a pot of oil on the heat, or if you do have a deep fryer in your presence, you can also turn that on in the beginning. Give your oil quite a bit of time to heat up. Now next up, we're going to proceed to make our batter for the potatoes, but before we do so, very importantly, begin by rinsing and draining your potatoes from the liquid. So very simply, using a strainer, proceed to pour out the water, and you can actually place your bowl just like that. Leave your sieve right over the board. It will actually, or rather right over a bowl, that will actually allow for your potatoes to continue draining. So give those just a few seconds on the side, and while that continues, we're going to proceed to prepare our batter. So we're going to add in about 3/4 cups of gram flour to this bowl. To that, proceed to add about a teaspoon of paprika powder. Add also a teaspoon of some minced ginger. Add some cumin powder. And proceed to add some coriander. So just grab a nice generous handful. And this you're going to proceed to chop very finely. So with the help of your board, proceed to press everything against the board, and using a sharp knife, proceed to chiffonade your coriander. Also be sure to take out the stalks before adding this to your flour. Right, once your coriander is in, proceed to season your flour by adding about a teaspoon of salt. You can also crush in some black peppercorns. And last but not least, proceed to grab your water, and using a whisk, proceed to mix everything together very quickly, beginning first by making sure that your coriander is nicely coated in the flour. This will allow for the coriander to not sink to the bottom, and also ensures for a nice consistent mix. Once that's done, proceed to add about a teaspoon of turmeric powder for color. Mix that through very very, very slowly. And next, proceed to add your liquid. Of course, adding in little bits at a time so that your batter is not too runny. And what you're looking for is a nice thick batter. Remember, it should not be runny at all. So add a little more water in there. Mix through. Right, once you've got a nice beautiful thick batter, proceed to discard your whisk. Place your bowl on the side, and next up proceed to grab another clean bowl, and to this we're going to be coating our potato in a bit of flour. So very, very simply begin by spreading out a thin sheet of some kitchen towel. And you can proceed to just lay your potatoes right over your kitchen paper. And this is particularly just to get them nice and dry. You can use a cotton or muslin cloth as well. But remember, it is very, very hygienic to use disposable paper for this particular process, and it will also save you quite a bit of time cleaning up. And all you're going to do now is, using your kitchen towel, proceed to pat dry your potato pieces. And proceed to add them to the bowl. Be sure to take enough time to actually pat them dry really, really well, so that you can actually be able to coat them a little better. And that way you will not actually have the butter actually dripping off the potatoes, but to actually allow it to hold on to the potatoes. So once that is done, proceed to add those to a bowl. Very, very lightly season with a bit of salt. And this is actually to make sure that the flavor carries through right to the center of your potatoes. And then very, very simply proceed to add a bit of flour. I'm using all-purpose flour for this particular technique. And proceed to toss those, making sure to get a nice light coating of flour right around your potatoes. Right, once that is done, we're going to now proceed to fry these. So very, very importantly, check for the temperature of your oil. I like to always use a little bit of flour, pour that right over the top, and check for the sizzle. If it doesn't sizzle immediately and the bubbles don't come up very quickly, proceed to give your pan just a few minutes to heat up. And while that continues, you're going to proceed to add your potatoes to your batter. For that, you'll require some tongs. So proceed to add about 4 pieces at a time. Of course, looking at the size of your bowl and also the size of your potatoes. And very, very simply proceed to use a spoon to mix that through. Making sure to get a nice even coating around the potatoes. And once that is done, proceed to drop that into your hot oil. And proceed to do the same thing with the other pieces. Of course, very, very handy to make sure that your butter isn't runny for 2 particular reasons. You may actually waste quite a bit of butter if it doesn't stick well, and in that way you'd actually have most of your butter cooking and actually sliding off completely off your potatoes. So very, very important to actually dust it a little quickly. The flour will actually allow for the butter to hold its texture really well, and it'll actually give for a nice, beautiful cooking. Proceed to add your fourth piece. And basically all you're going to do now is allow those to continue cooking until they're nicely crispy. So we're going to give that a quick check. So your butter is actually now holding really well. If I can be able to show you from one of the pieces, you'll actually be able to get the butter to stick very, very nicely. And also very handy to have while that continues. Remember, very handy to also have a bit of some kitchen paper towel or some serviettes to actually drain the excess oil once those are fully cooked. And all you're going to do from that particular point is proceed to add your potatoes in there. Proceed to mix through once more. Also, always give a bit of time to allow your potatoes to really just sit in the butter and absorb the colors and the flavor. Mixing continuously, and always allow for a fresh batch to sit in your butter just before it goes into the oil. It will actually allow for your potatoes to really get that beautiful flavor from the butter and the seasoning we did earlier, and it will actually also help you to get a nice beautiful coating on your potatoes much more evenly. Right, so just to check on these, we're looking for a nice beautiful golden finish. So we're going to continue tossing those in oil continuously, checking for doneness. And for those of you who are also looking to save time when doing this particular recipe, remember you can actually boil your potatoes or blanch them very, very briefly, but be sure to actually cool them in some cold running water to avoid them from continuously cooking. Then you can actually allow that to cool off, slice them and throw them in the butter. It will actually cook a little faster. So if you are trying to save time, you can blanch those very briefly like I did. It will actually allow for you to get a nice beautiful cooking time, as well as save you the extra effort of actually cooking them for very, very long periods of time. So we're just going to take a few turns once more. And at this point you can also use a sharp knife or a skewer, and you can actually just prick over one of the pieces and just check for doneness. So you should actually be able to have the potato pieces slide right off the tip of your knife. If they stick to your knife, then that means they need a bit more time to cook. And also very important, always check from the most center point of any piece of anything you're actually frying. This will actually allow you to make sure that it's actually cooking through to the very center. And once your batch is done, proceed to take it out of the oil using a pair of tongs or a slotted spoon. Be sure to give a bit of a shake to allow to drain off the excess oil, and proceed to allow those to sit in some parchment paper to allow them to continue draining the excess oil. And all you're going to do now is proceed to do the same for the rest of your mixture, all the way until you get to the very last end, where you're actually going to finish the whole batch and make sure for all of them to actually cook exactly the same way. But before we get that far, I'm actually going to proceed to do the rest of these, giving you a bit of time to take a break, refreshen yourselves, and when you come back, I'm going to show you the finished product, and we're going to go straight to the plating and finishing of this dish. So do not touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are with us before the break, we were just frying this off and now they're all done and ready to go. So very simply, just to finish this off and plate, as I mentioned, for those of you who are just catching up with the show, we've been making some potato bhajias. And I've actually gone through the process of making the batter, given the guidelines of how to make sure that you're going to get the most perfect bhajias you could actually be looking at making. Now you actually have the technique. It's all up to you now to try and do it yourselves at home. But just before we get to the last and final stage of plating, very handy to actually season. So I'm going to proceed to move those from the bowl with the parchment paper. And very, very importantly, always season anything that's fried. Remember, it will actually dehydrate quite a little bit if you added the salt before it went into the fryer. So very importantly to season right afterwards, while everything is still hot, of course. So once you've salted, proceed to toss, making sure to mix through very well. And for this, we're going to be serving that with a bit of some tamarind sauce. I'm also going to be garnishing with a bit of chilies, so very easily with the use of a knife, just proceed to slice some nice, beautiful chunks of chili. And now proceed to move everything to your bowl. And this particularly do quite well with, the butter can actually be used quite well enough to do any particular bitings you're looking at doing in this particular format. Remember, you can also alternate the potatoes for anything in relation to cauliflower, broccoli, any particular vegetable that is actually going to hold really well in the fryer. So please don't attempt to do this with tomatoes or carrots. They do contain quite a bit of liquid, and it will actually pop when it hits the oil, and it'll also actually split your butter. And by splitting, I mean basically incorporating a little more water and making the butter a little less strong. So be sure to actually also try out a few other vegetables, and even onions also work quite well for this recipe. I'm sure you will not be disappointed. So just to finish our plating off, let's proceed to give that a bit of some beautiful height. And then just to finish that off, a nice topping of a bit of some chilies. And of course, last but not least, a lemon actually does quite more than you can imagine. It really brings out the flavors. So be sure to just squeeze just a little bit of lemon juice right over the top. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my own version of bhajia potatoes. Thank you once again for tuning in, and for those of you who are tuning in from Facebook, thank you once again for joining our live stream today. For those of you watching from home, I hope you've managed to take down some notes and some new techniques you can incorporate on your very own bhajia recipe. But from the studios, I'm going to bid you farewell, and until the next episode, continue checking out our videos. Keep sending in those comments. We do appreciate them. God bless, and see you soon.